The power of restraint is not something that's often celebrated in our culture. We live in a world that praises excess, encourages constant expression, and romanticizes saying everything we think or feel. But restraint, true, intentional, thoughtful restraint, is a strength that often leads to the most powerful results. When we choose not to react, not to speak, not to act immediately, we are not being weak. We are exercising control, discipline, and an awareness that few people possess. In a world where noise is constant, silence has become a kind of superpower. It's not about withholding just for the sake of it. It's about understanding that not everything requires a reaction, not every impulse should be acted upon, and not every opportunity must be seized. Restraint isn't passive, it's active. It's the decision to wait when rushing forward seems more satisfying. It's choosing to listen when speaking might feel more gratifying, and it's realizing that there is a time and place for everything. In our careers, in our relationships, in our personal development, restraint often opens doors that force and speed never could. Think about leaders you admire, not the loud ones who dominate rooms with charisma, but the quiet ones who move deliberately, who speak less but with greater weight, whose decisions are not hurried but thoughtful. These people understand the power of restraint. They know that by holding back, by choosing their moments, they earn more respect, create more impact, and ultimately build more trust. Restraint can also be a form of generosity. When someone wrongs us, the easy thing is to retaliate, to give them a piece of our mind. But what if we didn't? What if we paused, absorbed the moment, and chose not to escalate? That moment of pause, that act of restraint, can disarm the situation. It shows maturity, and more importantly, it keeps us from becoming something we are not. Reacting with anger or bitterness may feel justified in the moment, but it often doesn't lead anywhere productive. Instead, restraint allows us to step back and decide how we want to show up in the world, not based on someone else's actions, but based on our values. In creative work, too, restraint plays an essential role. Artists, designers, writers, those who know when to stop, when to pull back, often create more powerful work. A canvas doesn't need to be filled completely to be beautiful. A paragraph doesn't need every adjective in the dictionary to be meaningful. A song doesn't need to be loud to be moving. The most elegant solutions are often the simplest ones, not because they were the easiest to come by, but because someone had the discipline to strip away what was unnecessary. Restraint in creation is not about lack, it's about clarity. It's the decision to focus on what matters and to let go of what doesn't. This principle applies in business as well. Every opportunity is not necessarily a good opportunity. Every client is not the right client. Every idea is not worth pursuing. The companies and entrepreneurs who succeed long term are the ones who learn to say no, not because they can't do something, but because they understand that doing everything dilutes focus, energy, and impact. Restraint in strategy, in growth, in communication. It brings coherence. It forces clarity. It builds integrity. And in a world obsessed with growth and speed, it becomes a rare and valuable asset. Restraint is also deeply personal. In a time where sharing has become second nature, where our thoughts, meals, emotions, and opinions are constantly broadcast online, choosing what not to share is an act of self-respect. Not everything needs to be public. Not every moment is content. Some experiences, some pains, some joys, those are meant to be held close, to be lived rather than displayed. This kind of restraint doesn't mean we're hiding. It means we're choosing to protect something valuable. It's about boundaries, and boundaries, especially in a digital world, are essential for peace, for authenticity, and for sanity. There's also emotional restraint, the kind that keeps us grounded in difficult conversations, the kind that allows us to hold space for others without making it about us. When we practice emotional restraint, we become better listeners. We stop trying to fix everything or prove a point, and we simply allow someone else to feel seen and heard. That's a rare gift. It's hard to do, especially when we feel passionate, hurt, or misunderstood. But the ability to hold back, to breathe, to stay present, that's emotional intelligence at its best. Even in ambition, restraint has a role. Ambition is good, but when it becomes obsessive or unbalanced, it consumes everything in its path. Restraint reminds us to pace ourselves, to rest, to be present with our families, our health, and our inner life. Without restraint, we risk burning out, losing sight of why we started, and waking up one day surrounded by success that no longer feels like success. Restraint helps us sustain. It gives our drive a rhythm. It keeps us connected to what matters beyond achievement. One of the hardest places to exercise restraint is in conversation. We want to be heard. We want to win, we want to make our case, but sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is not interrupt, not correct, not one-up, just listen, let silence fill the space, let someone finish their thought. Let the room breathe. This kind of conversational restraint creates room for real connection. It shows respect, and it often gives us insights we would have missed if we were too busy planning our response. To choose restraint is not to choose weakness. It is to choose power with precision. It is to recognize that what we don't say, what we don't do, often defines us more clearly than what we do. There's a quiet dignity in not always having to prove ourselves, in not needing to chase every trend, in not responding to every provocation. It's a way of walking through the world with grace, with discipline, with focus. There's a reason ancient wisdom traditions have always praised restraint. In Buddhism, there's the concept of right speech, saying only what is true, helpful, and timely. In Stoicism, restraint is central to virtue. In leadership, it's the difference between reactive and responsive. And in life, it's the difference between noise and resonance. It doesn't mean we hold back our brilliance, our joy, or our truth. It means we learn to deliver those things with intention, with care, with timing. That's where real influence lies. The power of restraint is the power to choose, to act from intention rather than reaction, to pursue depth instead of breadth, to embody wisdom instead of just knowledge. It's not always easy, but it is always worthwhile, because in restraint we don't lose our voice, we find it, and when we finally speak or act from that place of calm and clarity, our impact is deeper, sharper, and more enduring than we ever imagined. There's a certain heaviness that lingers when the truth is known but not spoken. It's not just the silence that weighs on us, it's the presence of something unacknowledged, something vital that has been left floating in the air with nowhere to land. The unanswered truth isn't forgotten, it's simply unspoken, and that absence can shape us in ways we don't always realize, whether in relationships, in society, or within ourselves. When truths go unanswered, when they are avoided, denied, or ignored, they don't vanish. They settle into the spaces between people, they creep into our choices, and they alter the tone of everything we say without directly addressing what matters most. Think about a moment in your life where something needed to be said but wasn't. Maybe someone hurt you, but no one talked about it. Maybe there was a secret in your family that everyone silently carried, pretending everything was fine. Or maybe in your workplace, something unethical happened, but people looked away. Those moments don't disappear with time. In fact, they often grow. The unanswered truth becomes a kind of echo, subtle but constant, and it doesn't just affect the person who holds it in, it affects the entire environment around them. Because when truth isn't allowed to live in the open, people begin to carry it inside themselves like a burden they don't know how to put down. This kind of truth, unanswered and unresolved, does something to our sense of reality. It confuses us, it makes us question our instincts. If we see something, feel something, and know it to be true, but no one else acknowledges it, we start to doubt ourselves. This is how people get disconnected from their own inner voice. They start thinking maybe they're overreacting, or maybe they're being too sensitive, and slowly they learn to silence themselves, not because the truth has changed, but because no one was willing to face it. That internal conflict, the knowing and the silencing, is exhausting. It's like holding a scream in your throat for years and pretending you're whispering. And yet, we do it all the time. We leave things unsaid because we fear what the truth might cost. We fear discomfort, confrontation, vulnerability. We fear losing people. We fear that the truth will destroy what we're trying to protect. But what we don't often realize is that unanswered truth already causes damage. It erodes trust, it creates emotional distance, it leads to confusion and isolation. Speaking the truth may feel dangerous, but avoiding it never actually keeps us safe. It just delays the moment when everything starts to unravel. In our culture, we've gotten good at presenting polished versions of ourselves. We're taught to curate our lives, to manage perception, to avoid anything that looks like weakness. But the cost of all that polish is honesty. And the cost of that lost honesty is connection. Because people can sense when something's missing, even if they don't know what it is. They can feel when we're holding back. And when we all hold back together, we create relationships and communities that are polite but not real, comfortable but not close, smooth on the surface but fragile underneath. The weight of unanswered truth isn't just personal, it's collective. In society, when hard truths about history, justice, or inequality are avoided, the silence doesn't bring peace. It brings resentment, disconnection, and a slow erosion of trust in institutions and systems. If people experience harm, but that harm is never acknowledged, it doesn't go away. It simply festers, waiting to be seen, waiting to be honored. And until that happens, no amount of progress feels grounded, no healing feels complete. The truth doesn't require us to have all the answers, but it does require that we stop pretending not to see what's clearly there. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. It challenges our sense of identity. It forces us to look at things we'd rather avoid. But that discomfort is not a threat, it's a doorway. It's the beginning of change. Growth doesn't happen when we're comfortable. It happens when we confront something difficult and choose to stay with it. The unanswered truth is not asking us to fix everything right away. It's just asking us to acknowledge that it exists, that it matters, that it has a place in the conversation. That in itself is healing, but telling the truth, especially a truth that's been buried, takes courage, it takes discernment, and it takes responsibility. Because once a truth is spoken, it can't be taken back. It changes things, and sometimes we're not ready for that change. Sometimes the people around us aren't ready either, but there's also a power in naming what's real. Even if it shakes things up, even if it brings pain before it brings peace, it creates a foundation for something authentic to grow. We often think of truth, telling as a grand, dramatic act, but most of the time, it's quieter than that. It's a small conversation, a gentle moment of clarity, a decision to stop pretending, a choice to no longer hide, and those small acts of honesty, they ripple outward, they give others permission to do the same. When one person stops carrying the weight of an unanswered truth alone, it becomes a little easier for others to lay their burdens down too. There are people who carry unanswered truths for decades. They build their lives around avoiding the thing they cannot say. They stay in jobs they don't believe in, relationships they've outgrown, patterns that slowly steal their joy, not because they're weak, but because the truth feels too heavy to lift. They worry about the fallout. They worry about being misunderstood, and so they live halfway lives, present but not fully alive, successful but quietly struggling, surrounded but somehow alone. But here's the thing, truth doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it sets people free. Sometimes it opens up conversations that have waited years to begin. Sometimes it breaks open a silence that was suffocating everyone. The weight of unanswered truth is real. But the release of finally speaking it, that is one of the most human, most courageous things we can do. There are truths that only you can tell. Truths about your own story, your own pain, your own awakening. And the world may not be ready for all of them, but you don't speak truth because the world is ready. You speak it because you are, and when you are ready, when you are steady enough to hold what needs to be said, you change everything. Not all at once, not always dramatically, but deeply and for good. We need more spaces where truth is welcome, where people can show up as they are, without fear of being shamed or dismissed. We need homes, workplaces, friendships, and communities where questions can be asked, where silence isn't mistaken for peace, and where reality, messy, complex, raw reality, can be named and held, not fixed, not spun, but honored. That's how we start to heal. That's how we begin again. There comes a moment when the illusion starts to crack, when the polished image no longer holds, when the weight of pretending becomes heavier than the fear of being seen. That moment is the beginning of the collapse of false power, because power built on fear, on control, on image, on manipulation, it doesn't last. It may rise fast, it may shine bright, but it burns out, and it leaves behind a kind of silence that can't be filled by titles or applause. False power collapses because it was never real to begin with. It was held together by performance, by systems that benefit the few at the cost of many, by pretending confidence where there was insecurity, by acting strong where there was fragility. And the truth is, people can feel the difference. Even if they can't always name it, they can sense when someone's power is rooted in ego instead of authenticity. False power speaks the loudest in the room. It interrupts, it dominates, it demands respect without earning it. It operates through fear, fear of losing status, fear of being questioned, fear of being exposed. But real power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to control every detail. Real power is quiet, grounded, unshaken by praise or criticism, because it doesn't depend on either. When false power collapses, it usually makes noise, scandal, failure, exposure. But it's not the collapse that's most important. It's what comes after, because the fall of what's false makes room for what's true. And we're seeing that play out all around us, in leadership, in institutions, in culture. We're watching the consequences of power used without integrity, and we're also seeing the hunger for something different. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending to be powerful. It's a performance that never ends. The masks have to stay on, the voice has to stay firm, the persona has to stay intact, and the pressure to maintain that illusion eventually breaks something inside. It breeds isolation. Because the more someone relies on false power, the harder it becomes to admit doubt, to ask for help, to be seen as human. They build walls that become prisons. They surround themselves with people who won't challenge them. They confuse agreement with respect, silence with loyalty, and when the foundation finally gives out, they realize how little real connection was ever there. But false power doesn't just live in leaders or public figures. It can live inside any of us. It shows up when we pretend to have it all together, when we try to control everything and everyone around us, when we use anger or silence as a weapon, when we hold onto roles and identities because we're afraid of what's underneath. It shows up when we measure our worth by how much influence we have over others, instead of how aligned we are with our own values. It's subtle. It can look like confidence on the outside, but inside, it's often driven by fear. That's why the collapse, while painful, is also liberating, because when we stop performing, when the false structures fall, what's left is something raw but real. We find out who we are without the titles, without the approval, without the need to impress. That's where real strength lives, not in how much we can control, but in how much we can be honest about what we don't control. Not in how many people follow us, but in how we show up when no one is watching. And sometimes it takes losing the false version of power to discover the true one. There are entire systems built on false power, systems that depend on silence, on hierarchy, on exclusion. They survive by convincing people to play small, to stay quiet, to seek validation from the top. But cracks are forming in those systems. People are questioning. People are walking away. People are refusing to keep up the act. And that's not weakness, that's clarity, that's strength, because there comes a time when holding on to something fake is more painful than letting it fall apart. The thing about false power is that it often seduces us with speed. It offers fast results, instant influence, the appearance of success, but real power takes time, it takes roots, it takes failure, it takes the kind of honesty that scares us. It means building from the inside out, not from the outside in. It means choosing integrity over image, and that's not always rewarded in the short term, but it lasts, it builds trust, it creates impact that doesn't crumble when circumstances change. You can tell when someone's power is real because it makes other people feel more powerful too. It lifts, it invites, it listens. It doesn't need to diminish others to feel strong. It's not fragile in the face of disagreement. It can hold complexity. it can apologize, it can adapt. That kind of power is rare, but it's what we're hungry for in leaders, in institutions, in each other. The collapse of false power is not just a failure. It's a reckoning, it's a mirror. It shows us what we've been prioritizing, what we've been protecting, and what we've been afraid to face, and it invites us to rebuild differently, with more humility. With more truth, with more care. That doesn't mean we give up ambition or confidence or strength. It means we root those things in something deeper than performance. We root them in integrity, in self-awareness. In service, sometimes the collapse starts small, a conversation that reveals more than expected, a moment of burnout that forces us to question everything, a loss that strips away the parts of us we thought we needed to survive. And sometimes the collapse is public, loud, undeniable. Either way, it's an opening, a clearing, and what we choose to build after that is up to us. We can try to reconstruct the same false structures, pretend nothing happened, move on with a new mask. Or we can sit in the discomfort, tell the truth, and start again, this time with no illusion, no pretending. The people who walk through the collapse and don't run from it, those are the ones who emerge with something unshakable. They don't have all the answers, but they're not afraid of the questions. They don't need to be right all the time, but they're committed to what's real. They don't need to be followed, but they know who they are. That's power, not the kind that dominates rooms, but the kind that changes lives, quietly, steadily, without needing to be seen. There's something powerful about stillness that we often overlook. In a world that thrives on noise, on action, on constant movement, the idea of being still can feel like a contradiction. We're taught to hustle, to be busy, to always be moving forward. Yet, in the midst of all that motion, stillness is not just a moment of pause, it's a form of strength. It's not the absence of energy, it's a different kind of energy. It's the power to remain calm in the face of chaos, the ability to be centered when everything around us is in motion. Stillness is often misunderstood. It's not about inaction or passivity. It's about finding a deep reservoir of peace that allows us to respond rather than react. It's the strength to remain grounded when the world around us is pulling us in 1,000 directions. Stillness is a form of resilience. It's not the kind of resilience that forces us to bounce back quickly or ignore our emotions. It's the resilience that allows us to sit with discomfort, to hold space for uncertainty, and to trust that in moments of quiet, clarity will emerge. When everything is loud and fast, it's easy to make decisions based on panic, fear, or impulse. But when we can create space for stillness, we open up room for our minds to settle and for our hearts to guide us. In stillness, we don't have to be in control of everything around us. We just need to trust that we can control how we respond to it. Think of a time when you were facing a difficult decision, the pressure of making the right choice was overwhelming, and the more you tried to think through it, the more tangled your thoughts became. In those moments, it's often the instinct to keep pushing, to keep analyzing, to keep seeking answers. But sometimes the best thing we can do is stop, to pause, to step back, because the answers are not always in the noise. The answers are often in the quiet moments when we're no longer trying to figure it out with our minds, but allowing our inner wisdom to surface. The strength of stillness is the courage to trust that the right answer will come, not through constant striving, but through allowing ourselves the space to listen, to reflect, to breathe. In our fast-paced world, stillness can be a radical act. We often feel that if we're not constantly doing something, we're falling behind. We're conditioned to think that productivity equals success, but stillness does not equal failure. Stillness is a vital part of the creative process, the decision-making process, and the healing process. When we're constantly moving, we miss the signals our bodies are sending us. We ignore the subtle cues that tell us we're overextended, that we're out of alignment, that we need to slow down. In stillness, we tune in. We get in touch with our true needs. We listen to our bodies, our emotions, our thoughts, and by doing so, we create the foundation from which real action can flow. There's a certain kind of strength in not needing to react immediately. In not being swept away by the latest drama, by the pressure to respond right now. The world will always be in motion. People will always have opinions. There will always be distractions. But stillness allows us to pause, to observe, and to choose how we engage. It's not about ignoring the world. It's about engaging with it more intentionally. It's about choosing not to get caught up in the turbulence, but to stay anchored in our own calm center. This doesn't mean we don't care or that we're detached from what's going on around us. It means we care enough to stay grounded, to be clear in our response, and to act from a place of strength, not reaction. One of the most powerful things about stillness is its ability to reset us. When we're overwhelmed, when life feels like it's coming at us too fast, stillness gives us a chance to recalibrate. It's like taking a deep breath in the middle of a storm. The wind may still blow, the rain may still fall, but for a moment we're no longer being tossed about. We can choose our course again, and that's what makes stillness so powerful. It gives us perspective. It allows us to see the bigger picture. When we're constantly moving, we can't see everything clearly. But when we allow ourselves to be still, we create the space to see things as they truly are, not as we fear them to be or as we wish them to be. There's a deep strength in knowing when to act and when to wait. In the rush to succeed, we often think that being busy means we're making progress. But progress isn't just about doing more. It's about doing what matters, and sometimes that means doing less. Sometimes it means being still long enough to recognize what's truly important, to gather our resources, and to act from a place of clarity and purpose. In stillness, we don't have to chase every opportunity. We don't have to say yes to everything that comes our way. We can be discerning, we can choose wisely, and we can trust that the right things will come to us when the time is right. The strength of stillness is not just for moments of crisis. It's something we can cultivate in everyday life. It's the practice of being present, of being fully engaged with whatever is happening right now, without needing to rush through it, fix it, or escape it. Stillness is the act of slowing down enough to really see the people in our lives, to listen to their stories, to witness their struggles and their joys. It's about showing up with undivided attention, not distracted by the noise of our own minds or the pressures of the outside world. In the midst of a chaotic world, stillness is a form of rebellion. It's a rebellion against the pressure to be constantly busy, constantly distracted, constantly seeking validation through external achievement. Stillness invites us to return to the simplest truths, that we are enough as we are, that we don't need to do anything to prove our worth, and that in the quiet moments we can find the peace we're searching for. Stillness is not a weakness, it's a deep inner strength that allows us to be present in a way that moves beyond surface-level interactions. It invites us to be authentic, to respond from our core values, and to remain anchored in a world that constantly demands us to be somewhere else, doing something else. Stillness teaches us to trust ourselves, to be patient, and to recognize that sometimes doing nothing is exactly what we need to do in order to move forward with purpose. The strength of stillness isn't just about finding peace within, it's also about creating a space where others can find peace too. It's about holding space for others to be themselves without judgment, without pressure, without expectation. And in doing so, we invite them into their own strength, their own stillness, and their own clarity. There's a kind of power in our words that we often underestimate. What we say, how we say it, and even what we choose not to say can shape the world around us. Words are more than just tools for communication. They are instruments of influence. They hold the potential to heal, to build, to uplift, but they also have the capacity to harm, to divide, and to perpetuate the cycles of fear and misunderstanding. So, there's a call to speak differently, not because the world needs more noise, but because it needs more intention. It needs more thoughtfulness, more compassion, and more clarity. The way we speak can either continue the patterns that limit us, or it can break those patterns and create something new. In the past, speaking up often meant speaking loud. The louder your voice, the more attention you got. The more forceful your words, the more you could command respect or demand action. But there's a shift happening now. where volume isn't the measure of power anymore. It's about resonance, it's about meaning. It's about speaking in a way that connects, that invites reflection, that fosters understanding. The call to speak differently is about embracing the quiet strength that comes with knowing when and how to speak in a way that matters, not just in the moment, but in the long run. The world is filled with noise. We're surrounded by opinions, demands, judgments, advertisements, and distractions. And in that noise, it's easy to think that we need to contribute our own voice in the same way, loud, urgent, forceful. But in doing so, we lose the opportunity to speak in a way that cuts through the noise, in a way that truly reaches people. The power of words isn't in their volume, it's in their purpose. It's in speaking not just to be heard, but to be understood. We've all been in conversations where it felt like the words were just bouncing off the walls, where nothing was really landing. We've seen debates that spiral into anger, rhetoric that escalates tensions, conversations that leave us feeling drained rather than enlightened. This is the result of speaking without intention, of speaking without truly listening first. It's easy to fall into the trap of reacting instead of responding. When we react, we are governed by emotion, by our assumptions, and by the need to prove something. But when we respond, we take a breath, we consider the other person's perspective, and we find a way to communicate that is rooted in respect and understanding. The call to speak differently is about making that shift, from reaction to response, from division to connection. Speaking differently doesn't mean abandoning passion. It doesn't mean silencing ourselves or becoming passive. It means speaking with greater awareness of the impact our words have. It means choosing words that are mindful of their power, that reflect the values we hold, and that build bridges instead of walls. It means understanding that our words can either perpetuate harm or contribute to healing. In every conversation, there's an opportunity to either deepen connection or widen the gap between us, and the beauty of speaking differently is that it doesn't require us to be perfect. It just asks us to be more present and intentional. In order to speak differently, we first need to become more conscious of how we speak. We need to listen more than we talk, not just to hear, but to understand, because without listening, there is no room for meaningful conversation. When we listen deeply, we start to speak in ways that resonate with others. We stop speaking just to make a point and start speaking to make a difference, and this doesn't require grand gestures or speeches. It's in the everyday conversations, the way we talk to our friends, our families, our colleagues, and even strangers. It's in the way we respond to conflict, to criticism, to praise, to uncertainty. We have a choice in how we engage, and that choice shapes the world we live in. One of the most challenging aspects of speaking differently is unlearning old patterns. We've all been conditioned to speak in certain ways, to use language that is ingrained in us by culture, by media, by tradition. Often, these patterns aren't designed to foster connection or understanding. They're designed to maintain power, to dominate, to protect. In many cases, they are rooted in fear or insecurity. They create divisions instead of unity. They perpetuate stereotypes, assumptions, and biases. Speaking differently means challenging these ingrained habits and choosing words that reflect a more inclusive, more empathetic perspective. It means choosing to be aware of the language we use and how it might impact others, particularly those who have been marginalized or silenced. In today's world, speaking differently is also about speaking with responsibility. We have the ability to reach more people than ever before through social media, through platforms, through conversations that can go viral. And with that reach comes a responsibility to use our words wisely. The power of social media has shown us both the beauty and the danger of words. Words can inspire movements, spark change, and lift people up. But they can also incite hatred, spread misinformation, and divide us in ways that seem irreparable. The call to speak differently is about taking responsibility for the words we share, especially when they have the potential to affect so many. It's about choosing kindness over cruelty, truth over distortion, and clarity over confusion. The act of speaking differently isn't just about changing what we say, it's about changing how we listen. Listening is an act of vulnerability. When we listen to someone, we open ourselves to their perspective, to their experience, and to their truth. It requires humility and openness, and it's through this deep listening that we find the space to speak in a way that is not just about expressing our own point of view, but about acknowledging the shared humanity between us. The more we listen, the more we understand that our words are part of a much larger conversation, one that we're all involved in. Speaking differently means recognizing that we're part of that conversation, not separate from it. It means speaking not just for ourselves, but with others, and in ways that invite others into the conversation. The call to speak differently isn't just a call to change our words, it's a call to change our hearts. It's about shifting from a place of fear, judgment, and defensiveness to a place of empathy, understanding, and openness. It's about recognizing that every word we speak carries energy, and that energy can either lift someone up or bring them down. And when we choose to speak with intention, we choose to contribute to the world in a way that leaves it better than we found it.